Welcome to the Fat Cats Rugby podcast, bringing you candid rugby conversations, great interviews and insights into Ugandan rugby, and a touch of rugby in Africa and the world over. Fat Cats Rugby podcast is a product of Fat Cats Media brand for all your audio-visual content needs and equipment hire. Hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to another episode of the Fat Cats Rugby podcast. Today I'm in the driving seat. When I'm in the driving seat, I bring good things. There's some juice here. Bruno, how was the juice?
Juice is good.
Juice is good, eh?
Thank you.
You see, when Ruben and Dung are not around, we have to style it up a little bit. Yeah, so my name is Edwin Owire here. I'm the fly half today. I have a right-hand man, Bruno Akampa, the real estate guy. And Bruno, tell us your weekend vibe. What was it about?
The weekend was good.
Yeah.
I was at Kings Park Arena. There are 3 games. We're home, from Sailors to Pirates, and also the title decider for the Central Men's League, which was an anticipated tough game. Falls against Thunderbirds. But it later turned out a comfortable win for us, the Falls, and we lifted the trophy. It was fun, and also wins for the others, for Pirates and Sailors.
Yeah, I'll sip juice on that one because I was supporting Thunderbirds and we lost. So Thunderbirds, oh yeah. Now, in light of the fact that we have Black Pearls who are champions in the Women's Central League, we have some 2 guests with us. These are formidable persons in the women's rugby sector. They have been around for a while. And considering it's Women's Month, we might as well give them the opportunity and platform to tell us about the women's game and how it has grown from the grassroots to where it is right now, to where Black Pearls can beat Thunderbirds in the final and win a trophy.
Right.
Yes, so I'll allow them to introduce themselves. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Helen Koyokoyo Buteme over here. Yep.
Jackie Kigozi.
Jackie Kigozi and Helen Buteme. Thank you for coming for the podcast. Helen, this is your second time, I believe. And Jackie, we're having you for the first time. So in true fashion, African sense, we'll say welcome. I hope you had some juice. I hope you have some water. Ignore the border guy. He's just a hater of the podcast. I don't know why he always comes during the podcast. We even changed days, but I think he saw Bruno and then he picked up on where we are starting. But for many who watch the podcast, we usually like to know the person behind the person. Who is Jackie Kigozi? Who is Helen? But I'll start with Jackie. Jackie, please go ahead. Tell us about yourself, how you enter into this rugby sector, and how you've emerged as a guest for the podcast as well. Yes.
Thank you, Edwin.
Yes.
I do not know how I ended up here, but entering women's rugby, I think I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It so happened that at the time when women's rugby was taking off, I think many of the would-be people who would have been in charge were away on study or doing jobs out of the country. So when we started having competitions, we were the ones on ground. So we got sucked in, and that's how we ended up in women's rugby. But before that, we were training at Chadondo, and for me, I called Chadondo Rugby Club the home of women's rugby. At the time, the first rugby players originally were training or trying to keep fit at Legend. So it was called Kampala Rugby Club at that time. And I think the population was too big for the people using the pitch. So the Kampala rugby people chucked out all the people who were not rugby related. So this is how we end up going across. At that time, Jim said there was a new rugby club coming up and they had space. So that's how we go to Chadondo. And then slowly, like the late Jim Park, he was encouraging the people. We were keeping fit with him. So I think he came up with the idea of rugby, and then maybe the rest is history. I do not know that how that rugby came up, because
You
had
were
to believe I
ambushed.
did not play rugby. It came when I was too old to break
Jackie, you
bones.
played 1 or 2 games. Yes, you
I,
did.
I cannot call that playing rugby, you know.
You did. As long as you stepped on the pitch, you
You
played.
stepped on pitch and you played.
According to me, no, that does not qualify, but in short, that was it.
Yeah, it was an ambush, because actually there was it called body fitness group?
Yes.
Yeah, and they didn't like us because we stole the late Jim Park from them.
Okay.
So their way of trying to steal him back was joining in our rugby sessions.
No, it wasn't stealing him back. I think that Jim was very interested in developing women's rugby. So for him, it was not a hard sell,
Yeah.
you know. And the fact that we were doing business at a rugby pitch, so even him, it wasn't a hard sell to him. Like, bring up women's rugby, he would be game. But yes, we trained side by side with the upcoming rugby players, and it was it is a good memory for me, very good memory.
Wow. And then maybe I'll come to Coach Helen just to give her brief and detailed background of her in the rugby industry.
Okay, I originally was a field hockey player.
Okay.
But I knew about rugby because I grew up with brothers who are passionate about rugby. Actually, one of my brothers was at the University of Nairobi. So there are times we'd go and watch Mean Machine play. And I fell in love with Edward Rombo. He was just, to me, a star. And there was another star in their team called Martin Dada. And so I loved rugby, but just from watching. Then my other brother, Nathan Wasolo, would sometimes have rugby tapes, especially Australia. And I fell in love with a flanker called Ofahengao just because of his name. I thought it was such a cool name. And so that's like sort of how I got to know about rugby. But I never ever thought of playing it because of, there was no women's rugby, or at least none that we knew about. So that was growing up in Kenya. Then I came to Uganda for university. And in Kenya, I'd been playing field hockey throughout school. And so it was natural for me to look for a hockey pitch here. But I found hockey was so disorganized and there was no ambition, no drive, nothing. It was just clueless. So when my younger sister and I were trying to move hockey forward, we got frustrated by some people, so I just quit. But I've been a sports person all my life, so I couldn't sit doing nothing, and I don't like individual sports. So one time we're hanging out with some of the hockey players who had also quit, and one said we should go and play rugby. She was just joking.
Yeah.
But I thought, why not? So I went down to Chadondo Rugby Club and I talked about, I want to join rugby, but I wasn't thinking of contact rugby, I was thinking of touch rugby. So they're like, yeah, guys play touch. There's some days when we don't have training, they play touch, so you can come and join. So that was Mondays and Wednesdays. So I'd go play touch. I brought some other hockey girls and we started playing touch with the guys. And then more girls joined in and it became a thing. And then sometimes, like she said, the late Jim Park was with this body fitness club, and sometimes they would play a bit of touch with us, but that was it. Until the late Sogi traveled with the men's national team for the Elgon Cup, and the curtain raiser was the Kenyan women. They split into 2 teams and played full contact rugby. So Sogi came back and he was like, why are you wasting time with this touch? It will take you nowhere. Play full contact rugby. And I was like, hell no, I'll get broken. Women don't play rugby. He was like, the Kenyans are playing rugby. You can go for the World Cup. And I told him no. We continued our touch. Sogi recruited other people in Chadondo to come and pester me. And they kept on pestering me. Every session they'd raise it. And I was like, why don't you ask the other girls? I'm not interested. And then Sogi told me, I know if I convince you, you'll convince the others. You're the leader here. So it got to a point where I was like, okay, we'll try it. But if we don't like it, can we go back to touch rugby? And they were all like, yes, it's fine. And so that's when they brought in Jim Park to be our coach. And so for the first session, he came along with the body fitness ladies and then those of us who had been playing touch. And he took us through the basics of tackling. And by the end of the session, half of us were like, wow, we love this game. And the other half was like, we don't like this. So we decided there would be one day for contact rugby and then one day for touch rugby. And that's how it went on for about 3 weeks. And then we who were playing contact rugby got greedy. We felt one day wasn't enough. So we wanted more days. And so we got 2 days. Then eventually, now that's when some of the people who were in the body fitness club were like, we had taken over Gym Park.
Yeah.
And they were like, we want our coach back. But then as much as he loved doing the fitness, he was really a rugby person. He loved rugby. And like Jackie said, he wanted to develop the sport. And then we just kept getting more players until we were 20. And then I came up with the idea of curtain raising for the Uganda Cup so that people can see that girls play rugby. And Chadondo was like, this is a good idea. And that the union at that time didn't want to know. They're like, women playing rugby, nonsense. But Chadondo was like, since we're hosting, we'll make it happen. So we really prepared for it. We split into 2 teams. We're going to be 10 on each team, and we trained. And keep in mind, we always trained in the evening, and we'd only use the 22.
Yeah.
Now, the game was going to be during the day, probably at 2 o'clock, and it was going to be the full pitch. Now, this is something we didn't think about. So we prepared for it. We were happy. We were excited. Then when it came to the day for the game, it was Arthur Mugweri who was reffing that game. And he came and informed us that we're going to play 10 minutes each way. And we were furious. We were so insulted. We're like, 10 minutes each way, that's so little time. You know? And he was like, no, it's okay. You just play. It will be okay. At least people will see something. So time for the game came, kickoff. After like 3 minutes, we were asking him, when is half time? Because
you were asking for water.
Yes, the pitch was now so big because we had just been training within the 22. And then like on the Friday before the game, we had like used the full pitch. But this is in the evening, like 6, 7, you know.
Sunset.
The sun is low. Now this is at 2. It's hot. Then there was a huge crowd. Remember, there was the 3rd, 4th player first, then us. And then there was the final. Wow. So there was a big crowd. So
Which year is that?
It was 2003. So we were so nervous. We were so tense. And, you know, it was really something so big. So Arthur Mugweri, to his credit, was great. He kept encouraging us. So the game ended 5-0. I remember I scored the only try in that game. But it was great because people didn't know there was women's rugby. Now they saw it was there. And then WBS was there for the men's game, but then they took time to interview me afterwards. And then I explained, anyone can join. It's a new sport. You don't need to know how to play rugby. Then I explained the training days and the times. And then the following week, we just got this influx of people joining us. And then we didn't look back. So I would say that's where it all started from.
Bruno, you heard what Jackie said. She said that Kampala Rugby Club chased away the non-playing guys and they went and formed Chadi. Now, I think you see why there are very many non-rugby guys at Chadondo, always in the Chigere, always in the Pork. But yeah, very, very illustrious background. I think you do mention something very important, the aspect of 2003. So do we say 2003 is the mecca of women's rugby, that year particularly?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Where were you in 2003?
I was in Kabale.
Planting potatoes.
Okay.
But we now have a women's team in Kabale.
Yes.
You also have a women's team in Kabale?
Yes.
Wonderful.
It's the Kabale Princess Bugs.
Yeah, I've heard that name, Princess Bug, yes.
Yes.
So those the Princess Bugs only play in the sevens tournaments.
At the moment, they just play sevens because I think they're the only team in Western Uganda that can actually form a 15 side.
Okay.
but the others don't have the numbers. So of course they can't play against no one. They actually took part in the Uganda Cup. The first match of the Uganda Cup, Thunderbirds traveled to Kabale and played them. It was.
Yeah, Thunderbirds, as always,
Yeah.
we go hard. So,
Yeah.
2003 is when the concept of Ugandan women's rugby commences.
Yeah.
I just want us take us through those particular players you'd remember. At times we forget where people come from, and we look at the finished product. So just give us a highlight of those particular names that
The
stood
girls,
out at the time. The initial, those who dropped off, and then those who stayed on.
the girls you
Bakalast.
trained with in the 22.
Many of them are not around today, but okay, they're alive but not in rugby
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
There was Anne Sizomu.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Still in the rugby circles.
yes. Actually, we were three. You could say we were three of the initial, like pioneers of women's rugby. We all came from hockey. One of them is in Canada. She moved from rugby to cricket and then went to Canada. She's Rebecca Kwenyu. Then there was Anne Sizomu and then myself.
Okay.
So we were the original three.
Yeah.
And then the numbers grew from there. We had another player from hockey called Joanna Ndika. She brought her older sister, who is Dorothy Nekesa.
Okay.
So, yeah, she was one of the original players.
We have Christine Kizito.
Christine Kizito came in 2004. Charlotte Mudola came in 2004. The following year, like at the beginning. There was Asha Sonko. She was a football international player.
Okay.
And also an international referee.
Yes.
There was Harriet Kayonjo as well. Actually, they're the group who came from football.
Yeah.
Yeah, together with Rosenberg Kanyunyusi.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we also have another referee who played for the national football team.
Rachel
Rachel
Kakaira. She came in
Kakaira.
2004.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So she was one of the later group. Yeah. So one of the earlier ones was Stella Chalikunda, who is now in the UK. She was also part of the
Is she the one they
2003
call
group.
Stesh?
Yes.
Oh,
Stesh.
yes, I remember Stesh.
She was part of the 2003 group.
Richa was Christine.
What about
Christine 2004.
Oh, she's
What
now
about
also not
basketball?
around.
Pamela Abeja.
Okay.
She was the 2003 group. She was actually in the opposite team from mine
Oh,
when we played. Yeah.
You
who
have
else is
an
there?
illustrious list there.
I was thinking of Yogi and Nantongo.
Yeah, those also came in 2004. Yeah.
Then
so,
we have Jero and Rachel Odoy.
yes.
Regina Luyole.
Rina also came in 2004. Jero was in the 2003 group. I believe she played that game as well.
Queen Dancer.
Queen, yes, she was in the 2003 group.
and Richa was Regina.
2004.
Oh,
Yeah.
looks
Wow.
like 2004 brought in more
Yes,
players.
because
You registered more interest in that. Yeah.
yeah, because when we say that Uganda Cup game, it was October 2003.
Oh,
Oh,
So actually, Charlotte Mudola joined us in her S6 VAC, so it was December.
oh,
Now she had initially joined volleyball, but she was more passionate about rugby. In her A levels, she was in Vienna, where she was playing volleyball, and then Martin Karungunjo was in Vienna as well. And he was like, "You're a Mudola," and she was like, "Yes." He's like, "Why are you playing volleyball? You're meant to be playing rugby." And then he pulled her to rugby, so she used to train with the boys and play with them as well.
Oh.
So in her VAC, she was taken to volleyball, but she enjoyed it, but it wasn't the same. Then it was Fred Mudola who actually told her, "You know what? The sister of Wasolo is at Chadondo. Why don't you go there? Because rugby is your passion. That's what you really, really love. So you go there and you play." And her mom also was very supportive about her playing rugby. So she came and joined us. And because she came looking for me, she was like, "Yeah, I'm Charlotte Mudola. My brother told me to come look for you here. I want to play rugby." And then so she joined 2003, but she just didn't play that particular game. It was December when she joined us, just before the Christmas break. But 2004 is now when because now the people who joined after that Uganda Cup game started bringing in other people. So we got quite a lot more footballers. Then we got this influx of people from karate as well that joined us. And
Are
so
they coming from across at Lugogo?
yes, because there's that dojo which was there. So they came because
Yeah.
they had
I
one.
think it's still there.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so they had one player who came, joined us, and then brought other people. And so that's how we continued. There was Mary Nakanyike. She was the 2003 group. So she's the one who brought more of the karate people to join us.
So let me get in Jackie into this conversation. I see she's taking a lot of notes. Jackie, you mentioned Jim Middleton, you mentioned Jim Park, and is it the bodybuilders team?
The Body
Body
Fitness
Fitness.
Club.
Body Fitness Club.
Yeah.
Yes, particularly. Give us some perspective into that aspect of how Body Fitness Club, Jim Park, Jim Middleton managed to grow Ugandan rugby.
I haven't mentioned Jim Middleton, but I will mention Jim Middleton in that by Chadondo hosting or supporting women's rugby, the executive of Chadondo at that time, which was led by Ian Walker, and then there was Jeremy Bali, there was Middleton. Middleton and Jeremy had much as say Ian was the chairman, these guys had maybe Middleton was finance and Jeremy was in charge of the pitch. So these guys were committed to develop women's rugby from day one. And for example, we used to have the rugby sevens. Those guys sponsored the Chadondo sevens for a very long time, maybe up to 3 or 4 years, paying from their own pockets. So that's how committed they were. And let's just say that women's rugby was really a voluntary thing. The guys who supported women's rugby was strictly because they liked, I think, rugby as a game, and they were committed to supporting it in whichever way they could. So they were paying from their own pockets. I remember that for a long time, Ian Walker, he used to ref women's games at noon, so you see him like roughing these games and you're like, wow. Like when we started going to Nairobi, say, or Kabeberi Sevens or whatever tournament in Nairobi, these guys would pay the bus tickets for the girls because, like Helen earlier said, no one was interested in getting involved with women's rugby. So for the love of the game, these guys sponsored and in reverse also encouraged and like they paid for the Chadondo sevens, the women's sevens, from their own pockets. And the good thing, or maybe the thing that we've never learned from them, is that they learned how to network. So these guys, they get their friends to sponsor. And this is how we pulled off these tournaments. But also, I think that they were not wasteful. From their own start, for example, if we hosted a tournament, we would go for cheap accommodation. For example, Jim Park, if the school was on holiday, maybe at least the Ugandan team would stay there. Would go for places like Red Chili, so it stayed affordable, and this is how we pulled it off, So, like I say, forever, women's rugby is Chadondo Club, and the guys who were there at that time. Okay, I'll let you in on this. For me, when we started going to Chadondo, I saw Jim Park and Kegwin. They are the ones whom I saw build that clubhouse of Chadondo. So for me, those guys, I associate them with Chadondo. But it was during Ian Walker's reign that women's rugby took off. And so you can't differentiate who did what. For me, it's just Chadondo.
Just Chadondo.
Yeah. And
Chadondo
then,
under the leadership of those guys.
Yeah, and an important person in this conversation is Ruben Ambicha, because he's the one who I actually talked to, and then he took the idea to the Chadondo ExCom about setting up women's rugby. So when I went to him, he didn't say rubbish, women can't play rugby. because that was the reaction from Kampala Rugby Club.
Yeah.
Because that's initially where I went.
Yeah.
And it was, no, why would women play rugby? That's nonsense. But at Chadundo, it was like, why not? Come and throw around the ball with the guys. So Ruben Ambicha took it to the ExCom, and then he also took it upon himself to get a coach, somebody to help us with the basics of passing. So the first person who, like you could say, taught me catch and pass was actually Grace Lubega.
Grace Lubega, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remember the former Heathens lock? Yeah, the
Heathens
jumper.
Lock, yes.
And people don't know, he's the one who taught me rugby.
Okay.
He's the one who taught me how to pass a ball, how to catch a ball. Then when we'd play touch, he'd always make sure he'd be on my team.
Okay.
So when he'd get the ball, because guys have this thing when they're playing with girls, they pass the ball over the girl's head, that sort of thing.
That's when you remember you fly off and you skip the ball. You skip pass.
But he'd get the ball and he'd make sure he gives it to me, Okay. So if there are times he'd come late for training and we've already started playing touch, he'd look, he'd see, where's Helen? Because sometimes I'd be there alone.
Yeah.
So he'd be like, where's Helen? Then he'd go to that team. And then he'd make sure I get the ball somehow, and then he'd keep communicating to me. And then from there, that's when slowly other people started coming. Because sometimes I'd be there alone, sometimes it would be Anne and Rebecca, but sometimes we'd have other commitments. But it was me who was there consistently. So, and like I said, the union had zero interest. They were like, women's rugby, no. So Chadundo took it upon themselves to push women's rugby and to drive women's rugby. They've lost their way somewhere along the way, but it's sad to see what's happening to Thunderbirds, but hopefully things will pick up along
Before we get into what happens with Thunderbirds, both of you mentioned something about availability of players and something about affordability. And then this is where I bring in the Fred and Winnie B&B, something affordable. We have 10 rooms. So I sneaked in that ad there. So we have 10 spacious rooms that provide accommodation to our guests that come in once in a while.
For up to how many people?
We have a fully stocked kitchen that caters for all your cooking needs, with a standby chef to prepare those cuisine meals that you would want to spend your money on once in a while. There is a serene environment, as you can see the lush green around the house. We have flora and fauna flourishing. You have a few animals moving around.
The fat
I think,
cats.
yeah, the fat cats
But they're
moving
two
around.
skinny cats.
They're two skinny cats. We need to feed them more. But then I think the key thing is a serene environment with Wi-Fi and power backup system that can assure you of non-interruptions of the hustle and bustle of electricity and the noise of Kampala City. So when you do get a chance, when you want to stay out of town, it's in Kisasi. Please give us a call, give us a shout out on the Fat Cats podcast page, and additionally on the Twitter pages of Fred and Winnie B&B. And we'll be very pleased to host you at this magnificent residence. The details will be in the description and in the ad below. And Bruno, we have seen two things now. One, that people went, they're non-rugby people from Legends, Kampala Rugby Club, and then they went and from Chadondo. Is that maybe that also explains where the pork is also good that side. Some people are just collateral damage along the way. But Bruno, I want to bring you in here. Even at the beginning, from 2003, 2004, we do see the baby steps that were being made in bringing up women's rugby at its infancy, and how important the men played a role in providing guidance, mentorship, and guidance in aspects of how to go ahead with the game, how to pass, and how to do that. What do you have to say about that in that particular regard?
I mean, even from the start, my idea has been for every men's club, they should be having at least 2 ladies' side. They could start with 1, but I believe at the level where we need more women's teams in the league, they should be having 1 side where you could say the girls can compete. That's side A. Then side B, the interests. Those those cases where girls are available in the holidays and maybe some months of the year they're at school.
Yeah.
But then they are sure during the holidays they can play, they can come to the club, train, learn more about rugby, also see their seniors, same gender, the ladies play, and maybe they can be more encouraged. And it's glad to see, to know about the guidance that the initiators of women's rugby learned from the men. At my own rugby club, Kings Park, it still happens. Even when we are training as sailors, we first play touch with the pals, and also train together the drills, the scrummaging, even actually some pals also scrummage with the Pirates at some point. So, I mean, even in the other clubs, I think, I don't know about Thunderbird because I've not been to their training, but at least I saw in the Central Sevens, I don't remember if it was last year, I saw some guidance to the Panthers, the Cobs ladies team. They were under Timothy Mudola,
Yeah.
and Justin Chimono. And to me, I felt like maybe this is the full-time guidance they need, especially for a ladies team like Panthers who are struggling with numbers. Also, most of their players are young and still in school. So, and as the oldest rugby club as well, they have enough people, I believe,
Yeah.
who should be training, retired or still playing. There is more that they could do to interest more numbers to legends. Yeah.
All right. Now we trigger in the years preceding the momentous occasion, if I could call it that, the first appearance at the Women's Rugby World Cup. But I want to build up from the year 2005. You've given us an indication or highlight of what 2003 and 2004 entailed, getting on new players, particularly you mentioned the likes of Charlotte Mudola, Christine Kizito, and you also mentioned a few mainstays, even Rosenberg, who is now a center referee, and Anne, who I think is now an educator as well.
There was
in addition.
Sauda
Yes.
Adiro as well.
Or Sauda as well. So
Yeah.
take us through this age of glory preceding the World Cup, where you eventually managed to make your strides to the tournament. Was in Dubai, I think, 2009.
Yeah, it actually, I think, started from 2004.
Yeah.
Because what happened was, now since I was into rugby, I went on the internet
Yes.
and started researching women's rugby. And I realized that women's rugby was being played around the world, and there was actually a World Cup. But it was a 15-a-side World Cup. So I was like, okay, Sogi talked about rugby in Kenya as well, because I was seeing England and New Zealand. I was like, what about Africa? There was South Africa, but that's too fast. Like, what about Kenya? Sogi talked about Kenya. So I checked out Kenya and I saw it was Mwamba that actually was the only club that had a women's team. And there was a phone number there. And then I saw there was the Kabeberi Sevens and that Mwamba would have a women's section. So I'd seen I think it was the previous 2 years that had Mwamba A, Mwamba B, basically playing against each other. So I saw there was a phone number, and so I sent an SMS. This was the days before WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So I sent an SMS, and it chewed my money. It was very painful because those days everything was so expensive.
Yes.
Yeah. So I sent an SMS, and I was like, okay, I sent it and forgot about it. And then that was about in the morning. In the evening, this Kenyan number calls me, and I'm like, who is calling me? But I had very many Kenyan friends, but I had all their numbers. So I was like, who's this? So when I picked the call, the person was like, you sent me a message. I'm like, who are you? So he was like, I can't remember his name now. He's like, I'm so-and-so from Wamba. I was like, oh, yes, I sent you a message. He's like, yeah, you want to come for a tournament? I said, yes. So he was like, yeah, these are the dates. You can travel on this day. And he basically gave me a breakdown, and I was like, great. And I hadn't talked to anyone from Chadundo about it. I just sent a message. So I call Ian Walker and I tell him, we've been invited for a tournament in Kenya. And then he was like, okay, what are they offering us? I was like, nothing. He was like, no, tell them they need to cater for all our accommodation for 2 teams and then our transport within, and then we'll travel.
So, sorry to cut short. Which 2 teams were these in particular?
It would be us, basically. We had given ourselves the names Thunderbirds, and it would be Thunderbirds A and B. Because we had now grown in
We had
in
the numbers.
Yeah, this was at the beginning of the year, but now we think we're about, almost 40 who are coming for training.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, at least 30 consistent people, but the numbers were about 40. So we'd even moved to playing 12-a-side, sometimes 15-a-side, depending on numbers. So this was about January, February, because the Kabeberi Sevens then was in March or April, around then, but it was early in the year. So so I sent a message again, and I was like, my club said we can only come if you cater for our accommodation. So there was silence. Then the next day he called and said, we'll cater for accommodation for 2 teams. So I called Ian Walker again and said, they've agreed. He's like, okay, great. So let's start preparing. So we started training and preparing for it. And the Kenyans had been playing contact rugby for 2 years now. And so we knew they were a lot more experienced. So now when it came to the week for us traveling, the Chadundo Excom sat me down and they told me, Helen, we know you're very competitive, but you need to understand that the Kenyans are a lot more experienced than you are. So don't go there expecting to win. This is just an experience. This is about exposure. Just go there to have fun. Don't get frustrated.
Like Kampala young lawyer. Vibes and experience.
So I was like, okay. And then Jim Park never used to travel. So basically I was going to be in charge of the team. Okay. So we traveled there with 2 teams. This was Kabeberi Sevens. I think we were probably only 2 people who had ever traveled out of the border, because I grew up in Kenya, so that was familiar territory. Then there were 1 or 2 who were either Kenyans or just, those borderline. Yeah. So they were also used to Kenya. But otherwise, the rest of the people had never crossed the Ugandan border. So it was a whole new experience. And it was awesome. The Kenyans treated us really well. They put us up in a great place. They fed us well. They offered us a crate of beer before the tournament, and we were like, no. We're not going to drink anything. So I remember we started off the tournament, and it was basically the Mwamba B team versus Thunderbirds A, and then Thunderbirds B versus Mwamba A. And the results is expected. Mwamba A beats Thunderbirds B, and so we're just 4 teams. And we now had to meet. Then we played each other, of course, Thunderbirds A, B, and then the big game was Mwamba A versus Thunderbirds A. And then it started raining, and the Mwamba girls were holding umbrellas. They didn't want to warm up in the rain. While we went to warm up in the rain, and I was like, we're going to win this game. Look at them. We're going to win this game. And everyone was like, yeah. And then we won the game.
You won the game?
We won the game.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
We beat them, and it was just crazy. Everything went crazy. We beat them, and then I was a top try scorer, and I was also the tournament MVP. And I remember calling back to Uganda and say, guess what? We won. Yeah. And people the other side didn't believe, or they just heard something else. Yeah. And the phone cut because of, the airtime run out, those things. And so they tried calling again, but it was those days when you needed to have airtime. So they couldn't get through. So they called quite a number of numbers, but no one had airtime until they eventually got a phone that had airtime. And they're like, what did you say? We won.
Wow.
And the phone cut again. Yes. So it was then that URU was like, oh, okay. We should now step in, And then Chadondo also hosted a sevens tournament. And of course, we had Wamba from Kenya. And then we also actually had teams from Rwanda and Burundi. They were the national teams, right? That tournament was crazy. She did most of the organizing.
What does it take to organize a women's tournament like that, of that nature, that magnitude, in an environment where it's a little bit something new, something strange?
The beauty of having a good support system. Remember that by 2003, Uganda had played enough rugby or international rugby, so organizing a tournament wasn't
That's
new.
That's
I
the
mean,
men she's
it
talking
came
about.
with experience. So at Chadondo, much as it was a women's tournament, the men chipped in. So, like I said, for me, these guys have been supportive all the way. You know, all the years I was actively involved in women's rugby. So at that time, I remember there was a tournament and Andrew Ward was our MC. So that's where we start with these boys. I call them boys, these gentlemen.
Yeah.
But they were boys. I was working, some of them were still in school. So for me, they're boys.
Yeah.
But so the team, like people gracefully chipped in at any one time. For example, when we had that Chadondo International Sevens, we even had a team from Brown University of the US. They came here under the impression that they were going to impart knowledge to the Ugandans. And the Ugandans showed them a move. Like, we
Showed the
were
colonizer
way
something.
better. We were way better. And in that time, you'd have, say, the Chadondo boys teams, like volunteer as liaisons. They were in charge, you know. So it wasn't hard. I don't think I learnt a lot then because the men were doing a lot of the stuff because they had been there, done that.
Then
So
Shell
we
chipped in
didn't.
with fuel, so people's cars were like happy because Shell's
And
Giving fuel.
surprisingly,
Yeah.
at that time, even the MTNs and the Airtels were not. They were not here, or they were not.
they were not
They were
like,
not sponsoring
yeah,
games.
they were not
You
in
understand?
the rugby scene.
So, I mean, we've come a long way.
The support team is very important. So she did mention that Andrew Wall was the MC. Andrew Wall went on, became the president,
president of URU.
and now is the vice president of
Rugby Africa.
Rugby
Africa
Africa, and is
Rugby.
also trying to do the coup. So let's tell Brian Momoza as MC that there is hope. There is
hope,
light at
there's
the end of the tunnel. You'll be able to make it someday. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Bruno, I mean, we see Kings Park organizing tournaments, and we don't know what it takes to do this. But I think the key thing that they have pointed out is the aspect of support team that is very, very important. Support teams that help you go the extra mile, make sure all the affairs off the pitch are handled very, very well. Are you part of the Black Pearl support team?
Yes, I at least from the training, Samor is there.
Okay.
You've already seen me in a Black Pulse shirt
Hey.
as well. And it's good that we have support systems up to now, but to me, to a larger extent, we are still lacking. As clubs from both men's and women's side, we are still struggling with membership.
Yeah.
Even some daily expenditures
Yeah.
to the medical kits. We are struggling. We can't hide that. Everyone knows. Even now, you go higher in the preparations and organizations. I mean, we faced one of the most painful, I would say, poor organizational skills in our league. I wouldn't want to mention, but it was a Victoria Cup where we even had fans who had bought tickets, and it was on, I think, a day before,
Yeah.
where communication came in and said the visiting team won't be making it.
Yeah.
It so happened the communication came in when I was at the rugby grounds.
You're done your Kings Park
ugly
things.
scenes. I
You're
never
early
want,
budded, eh?
I never want to remember those scenes, but I mean, the stands were already there.
Yeah.
The vendors were already setting up. It wasn't fun, and you also realized it came due to poor communication.
Yeah.
Which is an element of poor organizational skills and weak systems. But it gets better every day. At least now, every other rugby fan knows whenever there's a big game or tournament at Kings Park Arena, there are some things they are assured of, and they would communicate or even tweet them on social media if the standards became lower.
Yeah, we'll wait for our Black Pearls initial inaugural tournament of sevens or something like that. You're champions.
We will,
You can afford it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, Helen, 2005, you beat
Yeah,
Wamba.
because now you had stepped in.
Yes.
And they started picking interest in women's rugby, especially since World Rugby was also somehow also picking interest in women's rugby. And the attitude from URU wasn't URU alone. This was happening in unions all across the world.
All
Women were
federations.
women were literally fighting to play rugby. You'd be shocked to hear that New Zealand was not supporting their women's team. They would fundraise their own money, travel for tournaments, but they could not be called New Zealand. They'd give themselves another name. There was a World Cup New Zealand didn't participate in because World Rugby said they didn't recognize the tournament. It was organized by women, and World Rugby said they didn't they didn't recognize it. I can't remember who was the host, but the host pulled out, so another country had to host. Some teams pulled out, but the women still went on and held that World Cup. So the women playing rugby, it hasn't been easy. It's been a fight. So I mean, we see the women now on the series. There was the Women's World Cup just last year, which was brilliant. I mean, people got up at god awful hours to watch women playing because New Zealand have very horrible time zones.
Yeah.
But then people got up to watch, and it was a great spectacle. But we've come a long, long way worldwide to get where we are. So URU had these antiquated ideas of women not playing rugby. And it was difficult to convince them that this is something that they should support. But I guess because we were so determined, and the fact that we still went ahead, we played, we beat the Kenyan women, and then we came back, and then like people were showing interest even in our games in Uganda. I mean, it was just one team, Thunderbirds. We'd split ourselves. There would be a different teams every week, you know. I'd sit with Jim Park, we'd split the teams into two, and then we play. Next week, you're playing for a different team like that. And people would show up, sometimes 10 aside, sometimes 12 aside, sometimes it would be 15 aside. We'd play before the men. And sometimes we'd play at midday, sometimes at 2. And it would always be Ian Walker reffing. Sometimes Jim Middleton would ref, you know. And that's how we kept going. And then people got to know. So we just kept getting more numbers coming in until eventually the first international game was supposed to be 2005 against the Kenya national team. But again, Kenya also had issues. Mwamba was the one pushing women's rugby. The union wasn't interested. So when this whole Elgon Cup thing came up of Kenya-Uganda, they cut in reins, Kenya said, okay, I will send a team over. But they called it Kenya Barbarians. So that there would be no caps. So it wouldn't be recognized as a proper match.
Yeah.
So then we had to call ourselves Uganda Select. You know, it was a dampener because it was supposed to be the first, you know, international between Kenya and Uganda. And we spanked them 50-something, 3 or 5 or whatever. And so that showed why Kenya was reluctant because they didn't want to lose to Uganda.
Give you mileage.
Exactly. You know, then we were playing also against Rwanda. We actually traveled to Kigali and played against Rwanda, spanked them seriously. They came over, we also beat them. So, but then there's this international presence starting to happen. And before, it was just South Africa playing, but South Africa wouldn't play other African countries. They would play European countries and that sort of thing. Then Tunisia was playing rugby, but again, Tunisia would mostly play European countries because they just go across to Europe. And then there would be one African tournament which would be hosted up north by Tunisia. And it would be, the United Arab Emirates would bring a team. And it was just a team full of Europeans and Americans, basically. And then there was Ivory Coast. They actually had a team. So it would be literally 4 teams, Tunisia A, B, then United Arab Emirates, and then Ivory Coast. Then they invited Uganda. Now this is where Paul Sigombe thought, this is something I can push. I can get mileage in this. So he sent us for that tournament. And we did really well. First time to fly for very many players. That was in 2006. And Tunisia, drew with Uganda 5-5. But then they had beaten their B team heavily. And so they won the overall tournament. But then now that made Rugby Africa realize that they needed to include, other countries. So they said, okay, now we'll have Rugby Africa South and Rugby Africa North tournaments. So then Uganda was selected to hold the South one. So the Northern one had already happened, where we went and played in Tunisia. So they said, let's have a Southern one. And then Rwanda was invited, Burundi, South Africa was invited, Kenya was invited as well.
Zambia.
Zambia, Zimbabwe. So all those teams came. Zambia and Zimbabwe were also having their own...
baby steps.
Exactly. They were playing each other as well. And they had this... The rivalry between Kenya and Uganda is nothing. The one between Zambia and Zimbabwe is intense. It's crazy. It's really crazy. So then all these teams were invited. And then even a university team from South Africa sent an email and said, we want to come as well. That's Turkey's university. So they came as well. Then Tunisia also came down for this one. That was 2006. So that was the first big tournament that we had. And it went great. And then Uganda and South Africa met in the final, which South Africa won. Now, South Africa had sent like a developing team, you could say. But then these are things which made Rugby Africa now question World Rugby. Like, what are you doing for women's rugby in Africa? 2007, the same thing. Tunisia held the northern one. Uganda held the southern one. And then World Rugby, meanwhile, had applied to join the Olympics. And IOC turned them down. And IOC's two reasons were, you have a Rugby World Cup, and it's only for men. Where are the women? Olympics is about equality.
Yeah.
So where are the women? Then they also said, we're seeing teams from rich countries, basically, where Olympics is about people from poor backgrounds or from odds which, are so tough, succeeding. Yeah. But all we are seeing is privileged people. Where are the people without privilege? So World Rugby had to change their strategy. So that's why they invested heavily in the Kenyan and Fijian men's teams. Because they're like, these are the teams which seem they can succeed in a short period of time. Let's invest heavily in them. And then that's when they said, we're going to have a Women's World Cup at now the 2009 World Cup. That's when we'll have a women's version for the first time. And there'll be a qualification process through the continents and so on. So now the 2008 Rugby Africa Sevens tournament that Uganda held was basically for all the countries in Africa to participate in, and the top two were going to qualify for the World Cup.
Oh, in 2009?
But the tournament was in 2008. Okay. So the top two would go through to the World Cup. So that's where things just exploded, So initially when I joined rugby, I was thinking about the 15s World Cup, but then 15s was kind of out of reach. It's a lot harder to do 15s than sevens, but sevens it was a lot easier. And World Rugby decided to use women and the Kenya and Fijian men's teams at the World Cup to now strengthen their bid again for the Olympics. So 2008, it was hosted at Chadondo, the qualifiers. And we made it to the final. All we needed to do was win our semi-final, which was up against Tunisia. And we won it. And that's how we qualified for the World Cup together with South Africa. We played the final against South Africa and lost. But we had made history in Uganda by being the first sports team ever to qualify for a World Cup. People talk about cricket, but that was the junior team. And you can't compare junior and senior. It's like saying when the under-20s qualify for a World Cup, you're saying, the under-20 now men's football team. You can't, people will not take it as seriously as if now the Uganda Cranes qualifies. Then people talk about netball, but netball, those were not World Cups they qualified for, those were championships, which are different. So they had gone on the big stage, but it wasn't a World Cup. So we made history because it was NCS who even told us you're the first team ever, And so it was something big. It was really really huge.
What were the celebrations like, Jackie?
When we
The
qualified,
celebrations at Chadondo.
oh man, what can I say?
I think you guys wanted that crate of beer the Kenyans had offered you the first time.
Beer is not a problem.
Yes.
I think in Uganda we had beer and
Yeah.
Chadondo was home. So for me,
Yeah.
everything. But the celebration was very nice because the women had put in effort, you know. And at this juncture, I must mention was called IceMark Africa.
Yes.
IceMark Africa volunteered to sponsor the women's team.
Okay.
From 2006.
Exactly. And one thing that I don't know what we haven't realized, or the government of Uganda, we can't be sponsoring people to dinners after they've won. The winning thing is starting from down there.
Right.
Yeah.
So IceMark knew that, and we are forever grateful to someone called Mr. Christian. He was the head of IceMark Africa then.
Yeah.
And they used to export fresh produce. So those guys sponsored the rugby lady cranes wholeheartedly, starting from buying water, providing meals. I think they bought us gym equipment.
Gym
I think they
equipment,
so
boots.
equipped. They so equipped the Chadondo gym at that time. You know, it had some weights, but it brought in other things. They transport. You know, meals were guaranteed, even allowances, because before that would improvise. Jim, as the teacher he was, he would say, "Get Rolexes." So I think we had a Rolex supplier in Nakawa market. You know, every once in a while, someone would buy a box of water, or after the workouts, there would be eggs. You know, boiled eggs, and then guaranteeing transport. Do you know about, say, a kid from Kiswa or even Naguru go down? They need transport, you know. You'd finish after dark, but these people, IceMark was taking care of all that. So you can imagine what kind of relief that is if you've been involved in management of any team. So forever for me, I am grateful to IceMark Africa.
They sponsored the celebration. Bruno,
Yeah.
sponsorship. You know, we always have this discussion, and maybe it's supposed to come in later, but I'll just ring it in here since we're bringing it up. Sponsorship. How can we package? How can we package the women's game to have sponsorship? I'll get their text as well, but I just wanted to get with you. How do we package the game to make it attractive and have many sponsors in the game?
Unfortunately now, even as the corporate world expands and more companies out there, still it's a struggle to have them as sponsors for both men's and women's teams. From both camps, we are still struggling with sponsors, and I don't know if it's a capitalistic world that is diversifying now. You have to sell yourself as a club. Way back, companies would identify a team or any undertaking to sponsor. Now you have to sell yourself to a point of you have to have maybe the same proposal sent to different companies.
Yeah.
If you ever have a chance to talk, maybe Helen will tell you about it. You might spend the whole day just sending emails to different companies seeking sponsorship. It's just hard. And to me, in such a setting where now companies talk about the setbacks they have had because of COVID-19 and everything, I mean, it gets harder. The only way is not to just give up. You have to sell yourself all the way. Never stop. You have to sell your points. And now companies are more interested in what they will get, not what we will offer. What shall we get? Where is the value for money? And it gets harder now that most sponsors are not interested in giving cash.
Helen, sponsorship proposal. I do believe women's rugby, the first slide would have on the PowerPoint would have 2009 Rugby World Cup. I do want you to take us through just in a few minutes the World Cup and how we can use that to leverage our sponsorship battles.
To be honest, I think you slept on duty after that World Cup, because this was something huge. We should have come back, and then there should have been a drive to grow rugby in the girls' schools, then at the grassroots, expanding it out of Kampala. But we went there, and then the focus was, if the girls went to the World Cup, what can we do to get the men to go there? You know, and it seems to be like as if it's some sort of competition, which doesn't make sense. I mean, you need to look at Australia. Their most successful rugby brand is the women's sevens team. So they made it their flagship brand, you know. And using the women's sevens team, they've grown rugby in Australia, you know. And the simple thing people forget, women are the ones who get pregnant. Women are the ones who give birth. Women are the primary caregivers in most cases, 90% of the time. Yes, there's some men who are primary caregivers, but let's be realistic, there are very few. Women are the primary caregivers. Then also, when you look at early education, most of those teachers are women. So what am I saying? The more women you get into rugby, or be it any sport, the more children you have of any sex playing a sport. Because we all know there are many of you who, when you're in school, you know friends who the mother said you're not playing that game.
Yes.
And they were playing in secret.
Yes.
The father has no problem, but the mother has said no. And when the mother said, no, you're not playing that game, you're not going to play that game. But if your mother says it's okay, when you need boots, you go, Dad, I need boots. They cost 100K. I am paying your school fees and that is it.
Yeah.
You go to mommy, man, I really need these boots. It's 100K. Don't worry. You go to school with your new boots. So what I'm saying is, let's get more women into sport. Because when women are involved in sport, their kids will definitely be involved in sport. You don't even need to have women playing the sports. Get them involved at administrative levels. Get them passionate about the sport. Trust me, their children will also be involved. That's how we'll grow the game. One of the reasons rugby struggles to get sponsorship is it's such a niche sport. Very few people know about it. So when you go to a sponsor and they're like, but rugby is just here. Who am I, you know? Where's the mileage? Football, everyone knows it. You go into any village, they know what football is. But you go, because with Rugby Tackling Life, we've traveled to areas of Uganda. You go with a rugby ball and they laugh and they say, what is that? When you start showing them rugby, they've never ever watched a rugby game. They've never seen it before. Now, the funny thing I'll tell you is we normally go as a team of usually 4 people and only one is a man. So you'll find women were doing the coaching, the man is doing the coaching, but I'm in charge. So when we go there, we ask to coach girls and what. So people think rugby is a women's game. So it's after a few sessions, you'll get teachers coming to us or people coming to us and say, but why is this game only for women? The way it looks, boys can also play it.
Yeah.
So we tell them, actually, boys can play this game. So it's perception in Central that rugby is a men's game. Rugby is an elite game. It's for rich people, or people just have no idea about it. It's for wrestling. People box each other. But if we can reach out to more people, you know. So that's why I'm saying 2009 we slept. We had gone for a World Cup. Yes, we didn't perform well, but we had been out there. we should have used this opportunity to get into schools, to get into the grassroots, get more girls and women playing. You will also get more boys playing. We would have grown the game. Right now, as we stand, even in Kampala, there are people who don't know that the Ugandan men went for a World Cup. They have no idea. They don't know about rugby. They have no clue. You know, look at how we struggled to get people to Wankulukuku. Wankulukuku is not far. It's still within Central.
Yeah.
But people there had no idea about rugby. Why? We've not done enough to get rugby out of this Lugogo area. It is strictly in that area. So we need to expand the sport. When we expand it, it becomes easier to approach sponsors. Sponsors will even come and say, rugby is happening. How can we get involved? Now, when sponsors start sponsoring men's rugby, they'll automatically get into women's rugby because it's something you said, every men's club should have a women's club. And what URU has done well this year is having women's games sandwiched between men's games. So you have the reserve league games happening first. So usually it's at midday, then a women's game at 2, then a men's game at 4. It has grown the visibility of the women's game. You know. Now, when you have that happening, sponsors also look and say, okay, there are people here watching the women play and they're enjoying it and they're passionate. You know, we need to get more people talking about women's rugby on social media because social media is also where quite a number of these sponsors look. You know, so the more engagements, the more people are talking about the women's game, the easier it is. But right now, it's very difficult to convince anybody. You know, I wasn't happy for some of the games in Entebbe, like the Avengers games, were at 4 p.m. in Entebbe when there's no one playing. They're playing basically for cows and trees and the birds. Who is watching? It doesn't make sense having women's games at 4 p.m. and there's no one watching.
Or even the big games of the women's side being on the same day and same grounds with the big games.
Exactly.
Like, let's say, Pulse versus Avengers should be on a day when Kings Park is full, when Pirates are hosting Cobs or Heroes.
Yeah. Like, actually, what happened when we hosted Avengers and it was Pirates Cobs. That was really, really good, you know. That sort of thing. Then we can get more engagement, more people coming in. And the funny thing is, we've actually managed to recruit some players who had come to watch a men's game, had come early, and then saw women playing. They're like, you mean women play?
We can join.
And then they come and ask, how do we join? Or they ask that male player they came to watch, how can I join women's rugby? Then they bring players over to us. So this is the only way we can grow the game. So my message to URU is stop putting women's games alone. Fine, the women's game has happened. You've ticked a box, but you've taken the game backwards. So don't say scheduling the women's games is difficult. Sit down, make an effort to plan the women's calendar alongside the men's. Don't do the men's calendar and then afterwards try to fix the women's games in. Do them at the same time. This game will grow. And we'll get sponsors coming in, and sponsors will say, in particular, I want to sponsor the women. But if sponsors don't even know when the women's games are happening, and that's another thing I'd like URU to do, to have more engagement, more content for the women, you know, driving it. It's only this final week where we saw posts from Nile Special talking about the women's game. Yet Nile Special has been sponsoring the Women's League this year from the beginning. But not once have we been seeing any posts or any engagement. But suddenly there were Nile Special posts going on. But this was at the end, at the very end, you know. Why not have it from the beginning? Have NBS also talking about women's rugby. The NBS games that were shown, no one knew. It wasn't there, you know. They were only talking about, we are showing this men's game. But there was nothing talking about we're showing the women's games. It was up to the clubs to put out the information, which is the wrong way to go, because of the women's clubs don't have that many followers, we don't have that much engagement. So it needs to come from the top, which means URU, Nile Special, NBS, they need to be the ones pushing this, because it's wrong to say, oh, women don't have many fans. What have you done to bring in the fans? So as the union has to work together with the sponsors and with the clubs to find a way. How can we grow this bigger? How do we get more fans, and how can we get women's rugby more out there? So even when it comes to schools, the school boys rugby games are going on. We've not heard anything about
Girls.
any
Girls,
plan for
yeah.
the girls. There's nothing,
Just sosh.
exactly. And the thing is, I've been to schools where you've talked to girls, they want to play rugby. Sometimes the challenge is their school administration. Then other times the challenge is there's lack of competition. And you know how it is in school, you want to get out of school. So are you going to sit and wait for rugby, or you'll go with volleyball, hockey, netball, where they're getting out of school?
Yeah.
So these are the challenges that you could say rugby is facing.
In light of these challenges, I know we could go on and on, but we're losing a lot of light now. So I think we do believe we have earned the right to have a part 2. So in respect to this conversation, women's rugby will be one of those entertaining conversations we'll always have. Maybe I'll just bring in Jackie to close this one, and maybe give us a particular parting shot in respect to how you have seen the game grow and how far you'd want it to go, and then we can call it a day.
Thank you, Edwin. I do not think that I am rightly placed to comment that, but as someone who was involved in rugby, I happened to look at, say, our first 5-year plan, and some of the things that we had aspired to achieve have been achieved. There was having women participate in technical roles and whatever. We have ladies reffing and coaching, taking the game to the grassroots. Maybe not quite, because we had said that we need to purposely come from the grassroots up and build, and also have say many girls' schools participating, but maybe like Helen has just said, this is not quite happening. But that is also due to the fact that people still are not so informed that rugby is one of the safest games to play. People don't know that the rules of rugby are not even called rules, they're called laws. And so the degree of, say, safety that is emphasized is much more than in other games. And also this lack of sponsorship for women also is a great hindrance. But I guess, like maybe a sponsor would say, show me the mileage I'll get out of sponsoring you. And if our players are not enthusiastic and showing that they're hungry to win tournaments, because winning a tournament, the margin matters. If it's such a big gap, then you discourage the sponsors. So, and last but not least, okay, but this is greatly like it's connected to sponsorship. If we have no sponsors, we cannot go and play better teams. And one of the ways of improving is playing people who are better than you. So if we are reduced to only playing within Uganda, we might not go very far.
So as a parting shot here, it's all about strategy in how to optimize the visibility of the women's game to make it more lucrative for sponsors, and to have as many ladies play the game and grow to the level of the men's. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll most definitely will have to have a second edition of this. Our daylight has run away from us. And from Fred and Winnie B&B, we'll just say thank you. And the podcast, keep on watching. Subscribe to our channels on YouTube. We have social media platforms on TikTok, We have some funny videos there. We have Instagram, and we also like our page on Facebook. Thank you very much, and keep it Fat Cats.
Thank you.
The stories were still there.
The stories were still there.
There's a lot of,
A lot.
women's rugby.
So just put it on and then stop it and then save it. Huh?
Say stop.
Stop it.
Thanks for listening in. Share with us your thoughts from today's episode, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.